Hi, everyone. So I hope you're all doing well. As you probably have figured out by now, I'm not in class today because I am observing Yom Kippur. So I will get back to your emails and questions as soon as I can after it is over, so probably Tuesday. But in the meantime, I'm sure you have some questions about your chunks because I will have returned them at this point, I believe. So I wanted to give you some guidance on how to read the rubric or how to interpret it in case these descriptors aren't useful enough. Um, I do want you to note this is a completely different assignment. It's the exact same rubric. I'll be using the same rubric year round because this is a way for you to track your progress on each of these skills. It's skill-based learning. Hooray. Anyways, so I am going to walk you through these categories so you have an idea of what I'm looking for. Here we go. So for your claim to be meeting expectations, to be meeting the standards, it needs to be an argument, period. And I need to know what you're arguing. For example, relationships impact identity. Great. That's opinion. However, it doesn't really give me a lot of reasons, and they're definitely not logical yet. So that's meeting the standard because you are giving me an opinion. To advance in this, you need to give me logical reasons. For example, relationships impact identity because they are the models that we model ourselves to be like those people, etc. And to be advanced, again, this is where I want you to be, just a reminder, to be advanced, to get to the 4 or the 2 area, whatever you want to call it, I'm looking for something that I might not have heard before. So if you have a logical, smart claim that we have spoken about in class, you are here automatically. If it's something new, if it's a different angle, or even just particularly good wording in the claim, you'll be here. A 1 generally means, or a 1 or a 2, depending on the scaling of the rubric. Approaching generally means that I'm not sure what you're trying to argue, and this could be either because of word choice or because it doesn't quite seem to be something arguable from the text. For example, you probably could not argue that in girl, let's see, it would be very hard to argue that race plays a factor into someone's identity. It does, but it's not in the text. So it would be hard to argue with that text. And then a 0.5 means that it is summary, it is not opinion. For example, in girl, the girl talks about or remembers things that she talked about with her mom. That's not an argument, it is a fact. So please do keep that in mind if this is where you ended up. To get over here, you need to make sure that you have a clear opinion. It needs to be a clear opinion and it needs to be obviously based in the text. You'll also notice the only time you can ever get 0 is if you just leave something out altogether or not turn in your work altogether. So as long as you turn something in, you're getting at least some of the points. Hooray! 0.5 out of 2, that's 25%. Yay, I think. Anyways, moving on. So that's for your claim. And again, this will be the same rubric all year for every assignment where you have a claim or thesis. Now, for evidence, to be meeting the standard, it needs to be evidence that is connected to your claim, but that might need some explanation. So it needs to have a clear connection, but maybe it's not the best evidence to prove your claim. To score a proficient or advanced, it needs to be evidence that is clearly connected to your claim and that will prove it easily, or that even adds something new to it, particularly if the word choice is interesting. There's the point of this is that there is lots of evidence in anything you read that could prove pretty much everything. So the idea is, how do you pick the best evidence for something? So for example, looking at hills like white elephants, say that I want to argue that relationships with a power imbalance impact identity because one person is reliant on the other and therefore has to mold their identity to the way that the person in power wants. Say that. So there's so many different pieces of evidence I could pick from hills like white elephants to prove that. For example, I could use this. I might have the man said, just because you say I wouldn't have doesn't prove anything. So I could use this evidence, say that he's being very brusque, which shows that he has some level of dominance over her, and that's fine. that's connected to my claim in some way, but I needed to explain it. It's not very obviously connected to my claim. Whereas another piece of evidence I could use to prove that same claim is this passage. It's really an awfully simple operation jig. The girl looked at the ground, the table legs rested on. He's clearly pressuring her in this piece of evidence, and he's able to pressure her because he has power over her. So, with this power, he's pressuring her to do or become something she may not want to. That evidence is a little bit more obvious because you can see the him kind of forcing his opinion on her. I could also use this one, I think is my favorite, because it's clearly connected, but it's a little less obvious. I feel like I'm going to confuse you more at this point, so feel free to skip this part, but here's how I see it. Remember that as a reader, I am a thinking being, right? So I'm going to be, as I read your essays, I'm thinking and I'm doing the analysis in my head as well. So So as I'm reading, I'm looking for you to use evidence that shows dominance, for example, if this were your claim. This one shows conflict, not necessarily dominance. Or at the very least, it shows that she doesn't have dominance over him. Here, where he's pressuring her, does show a bit of, where is it? Where are you? Aha. Shows a bit of dominance because he's pressuring her and she doesn't feel like she can respond, which makes it a clearer evidence for me. Whereas this one, where she's asking a question, what does it say? This to me implies that she is dependent on him just to survive in this country because she doesn't know what's happening around her. She can't read the language. And this makes her, I suppose, vulnerable to every one of his whims. He could tell her pretty much anything, and she has no choice but to believe it because he has the power here. He understands the language, and she does not. So this would be, for example, a four evidence for me because it would, or an advanced evidence for me because it adds another dimension to relationships with power, etc. It adds the context, it adds a language bit, etc. So again, I have a feeling this part is going to be more confusing than not, but if you can see the difference between these, hooray. My point is that any of these are valid pieces of evidence. Just some of them might be easier to prove your claim than others. Hopefully, I didn't just give you a headache. I might have. I'm sorry. Moving on. Analysis or commentary. So, for you to be meeting the standard, I'm looking for you to do some sort of connection between the evidence and the claim. And this often means what I usually see is that you will say something about the evidence. For example, here we see a power imbalance, and then say something about the claim. This shows that people with more power in relationships impact the other ones. I can see how you got there. It is a logical conclusion to get to, but you haven't explained to me the steps of your thinking. That's really what I'm looking for to see that you are proficient or advanced, because if you don't explain to me the steps of your thinking, then I'm doing the thinking for you, um, which I don't need to do because I have an English degree. So that's the point. I need you to show me that you can do the thinking and the logic and the critical process or whatnot by yourself. So to be proficient, you need to give me a complete line of reasoning. For example, here he is pressuring her and she doesn't feel like she can respond, hence her silence. That's discussing the quote. Him applying pressure and her feeling like she can't respond is clear indication of a power imbalance. He gets to speak and express his opinion and pressure, and she does not. And as such, this affects how she responds to him and what she chooses to do. So by having power over her and pressuring her, he is able to change her choices and her identity simply by having that power to exert over her, something like that. So make sure you walk through your entire thought process so that I can see it. And as usual, to be in advance, it needs to be something that I haven't seen before or to be particularly good close reading. A good way to get here is to make sure that your own language uses words that are similar to the words from the quote and the claim. So, for example, and again, you could take these in so many different ways. I could say that here he is speaking very decisively instead of asking her for what she wants, despite this being an operation that is going to happen on her body. So, because these are statements and not questions, it is indicating his certainty and his power in the relationship because he's not leaving it up to her. He's telling her that this is okay and she will do it. He doesn't let her say that she doesn't mind. He says, I know you don't mind. So these statements instead of questions indicate that he has some power over her because he doesn't even ask for her thinking. He tells her what it is. That's the kind of close reading I'm looking for, using the syntax, using the diction, maybe the figurative language to explain to me something new that I learn about this text. Now, if you scored approaching, it's because you've written something using the evidence, but it doesn't actually go back to your thesis. And this is the reason that I recommend to start with the evidence. Don't start with the don't start with a claim, because often after you analyze your evidence, you end up with a completely different claim or a claim that doesn't quite match your analysis. So do go back, or I really do recommend starting with the evidence and analysis before you write your claim, but that's again totally up to you. Or sometimes you could write me something really cool and philosophical, but if it has nothing to do with the evidence, then it has nothing to do with the evidence. And that's really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for you to be analyzing and critical thinking about the evidence, about textual evidence. And again, emerging means that I'm getting mostly summary. So if everything you've written is something that can't be argued with, it is summary. For example, you cannot argue with the fact that, where is my tab? You cannot argue with him saying, he says that she would not mind it and that it's not really anything and the operation is very simple. You can't argue with that because it's here. It's in different words, but it's still here in writing. That makes it summary. I really hope I'm not confusing y'all further. As you can see, this is also the part that's worth the most points. It's worth about a third of the points, sometimes more, depending on the size of the assignment, because this is the most interesting part and the part that takes the most thinking. So I want to see that you can do it. Huzzah! Anyways, there's a few things about English fluency and expression. There's diction, syntax, and then the professionalism. I'm sorry, I don't know why you can't see the whole thing. Anyways, always I'm looking for you to be using the right words, correct grammar, and that if there are mistakes, they're not too distracting. An advanced score here means that you have a particularly interesting style, or you have very complex sentences that work to your benefit rather than distract. This is super important, y'all. I don't want you to pull up a thesaurus and use all the multisyllabic words you know, because that's, unless they're not the right word anyways, you don't need to use them. I'd rather you use simple language and make a clear argument rather than stuff in every complicated word you can find in the thesaurus in the hopes that it dazzles me, because it won't. So don't do that. Use words that you know, use words that are precise for what you are trying to argue, which is why I say, please don't say things like it has a positive or negative effect, because, okay, yeah, duh. Be more specific. It has a constructive effect. It has a destructive effect. It has a formative effect, whatever. Supportive effect. Anyways, be specific with your language and make sure that when you're doing complex sentences that you can read from one end to the other and still remember what you were saying. If you can't remember what you were saying at the beginning of a sentence, it's too long. Rule of thumb. And then, of course, this is for the professionalism category. Excuse my phone. For the professionalism category, I'm looking for no errors in spelling or mechanics for you to be scoring proficient. It's a matter of respect thing for me. And also because honestly, when you go out in the real world and you write things with lots of typos and simple spelling or grammar mistakes, people notice and they judge it. And I don't want you to be judged based on that. So feel free to make all the grammar mistakes or different whatchamacallit, speech styles you want when you speak or in informal writing, but I do also want to see that you can proofread. Please proofread. Please, please, please. Especially if the issues with proofreading get confusing. If it takes away from your text, then it doesn't matter if you have an amazing argument. If I can't understand it, I can't evaluate it. And again, here would be no mistakes despite using complex diction and syntax. So I rarely click this unless I've already clicked one of these. Yay. Let me know if y'all have any questions. Again, the entire English fluency section is worth the same amount as the analysis. So please don't panic too much, for example, if you've turned it in late, because you're not losing a lot of points from that. But do pay attention to the language you're using, because all of this, how you use the English language, is going to impact how I understand your reasoning and your claim. I hope this was helpful and not too confusing, or at least partially helpful. You're welcome to let me know if now you are more confused than ever. I will also do a how-to for you. I will walk you through how I would do a chunk for the reading. And hooray, let me please write down any questions you have and we can go over them together on Wednesday or on Tuesday at office hours. And I will see y'all soon. Take care.